Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.com, and this is another video. Last time we went over like Flexbox and kind of did a little bit of a takedown on Flexbox and how to use it. Now we're going to be doing a takedown on Grid and how to use it. I'm not going to be going through all the features of Grid. I generally only use the Grid template areas. I think that kind of does the job pretty well. There is the other way of doing it where you kind of specify like where the rows end and all this stuff. I just find it easier to do the Grid template areas. So I'll show you guys how to do that and make use of Grid. So let's go to my screen. So we're going to head over to my little Flexbox Grid project here. It still has all the code in there from the Flexbox lesson, so I'm going to clear that out. Okay, but it's the same premise, so we'll start kind of in the same place we started off before, where basically by default, if I have like 3 blocks, so here I have 3 divs of 3 colors. If I go there, let's let this refresh. Okay, by default, the HTML is going to end up stacking on top of each other. So it stacks my blocks on top of each other. Now let's say I wanted to turn these into sort of like, let's say we want to make this red, like a big navigation bar. The blue is kind of like this main area. And then the green is like this little sidebar. Okay, that's what we're going to kind of go for, and we'll see how you can do that with Grid. Okay, but just like Flexbox, you need to have sort of a container element. So we're going to create another div, and we'll give it the ID of container. Doesn't matter what you call it, but that's what I'm going to do. And then I'm going to wrap these three blocks inside that div. Okay, so that's always the idea. Anything you want Flexbox, anything you want gridded, it's got to be wrapped in that container. Okay, because that's what's it's going to format anything inside. So you always have to think of blocks inside blocks. Okay, cool. So now we'll still have the Flexbox thing, so that's why you see it do that. Let me just go back in there and clear all those. So CSS, .css, and I just want to clear out the container because we're going to use Grid now. So let's see here. So in this case, we go display. Instead of changing it to Flex, we're going to change it to Grid. That just says, hey, this container is going to treat all of its child elements as a grid. Okay, now I need to kind of describe what that grid looks like. Okay, and the easiest way to do that is to do Grid template areas. There's a bunch of other ways you can do it. I just find this to be the absolute easiest. And basically what you do here is that each row, you make a string. Okay, so I do quotation marks, that equals 1 row. And let's say I'm building a 3x3 grid. Okay, a 3x3. No, we'll say 3x2. Okay. No, I'll go back with 3x3. 3x3 would make sense. Okay. And I wanted that red block to take up the entire first row. So I said 3x3, so there's 3 columns and 3 rows. So I want on the first row the red block to take up all 3 columns. On the second block, what's the other color? Blue. I want blue to take up the first 2 columns on the second row, and I want the green block to take up the third column, and I'll just do the same thing for the third row. Blue, blue, green. Okay, and that kind of sketches out my grid. Now it doesn't know by the names, like, oh, is this blue or green? I have to go in there and specify that. So now I have to go back to my 3 different blocks and tell Grid which one's which. So I'm going to say, hey, just so you know, this one element, that's the grid area that I specified as red. Okay, and number 2, that's the grid area that I specified as blue. Okay, and then this is the grid area that I specified as green. Okay, so now it knows how to line them up. I'm going to get rid of these fixed heights and widths. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the margin. Actually, I'll just get rid of this whole style. Okay, and I'm going to make sure that this grid container has a fixed height. So height, say 1,000. So it's going to try to evenly space it height-wise. So it'll basically, since there's 3 rows, it'll chop that 1,000 pixels into 3 of like 333 pixels, and then the blue, basically blue, will take up 2 rows of that. So it'll take up about 600 pixels. Red will take up about 300 pixels. So if I hit save, and I take a look and see there it does that. Maybe that's too high. Let's make it 500, so that way it's more visibly clear. But basically, based on the grid that I sketched out, it figures out everything proportionally. Because again, it's thinking of a 3x3 grid. So if I were to actually go in the elements and then highlight that container div, see there's the 3x3 grid. Okay, and the red is taking up the first row. Blue is taking up the first 2 on the second and third rows, and green is taking up the third spot in the second and third rows. Okay, so that's the beauty of grid. I can kind of specify the template pretty easily. Okay, and what's nice is that I don't have to necessarily do much to change it. If I were, so let's say we were to make a media query. Okay, so at media, I have to go Google, it's been a while. Okay, media query, CSS. Okay, I'm just gonna use, this one's fine. There we go. At media. Okay, and if you don't know what this means, basically what it does, it says, okay, if the media is a screen and the width is no more than 600, so anything 600 or less, then we're going to use this style. Okay, so basically, I usually like to do it like, let's say, yeah, 600 is good. That's when we start getting sort of under tablet size. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the behavior of the container. And now the grid template areas. Okay, now we just redo it. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to have everything on its own row. So basically it'll be red, blue, green. Okay, and basically it'll just redraw my grid based on the areas I labeled based on when I just sketched out. So now watch what happens. Oh, and then I also change the height at that point to 300 pixels. Okay, save. So let's see here. Let's go to the page. So right now you don't see any difference because it's a bit larger screen. But let's, oh, I already have that open. Oh, now I just closed it. Waiting for the inspector to show up. Reopening it again. Okay. I'll just refresh the page. Or actually, my browser's just frozen. Okay, so I'm going to close some of these browser tabs. And let's reopen this up in live server. Cool. Let's open up the inspector. There it goes. And we're going to go look inside the device toolbar. So we click on this. This brings us here. So again, right now the width is 1024. So I'm going to change this to, so if I were to change this to an iPhone, I always like to do the iPhone 5e because that's the smallest. But see, now they stack as a column because that's when the media query kicks in and then uses that grid template areas from that media query. So it makes responsiveness really easy. I don't have to like redesign the whole thing. I just say, okay, when the screen is this size, this is the dimensions, and when the screen is this size, these are the dimensions. And then I can just worry sort of about what's the content inside of them, and yeah, makes responsiveness pretty easy. Yeah. Only difference is that like it's, the difference I would say is I would use grid if I have like a fixed number of blocks, okay? So that way I know I can actually line them up in a grid. Now, if it's something like a list of products where you might have 100 products, you might have 50 products, and you want them to kind of wrap, then a flexbox is going to be a better choice. And oftentimes the end result is you mix them. Okay, maybe I have a fixed number of blocks that's my overall website layout, but within those blocks I need to have sort of cards or something like that that's not fixed. So then I'll have like a flex